Good afternoon. We're coming on the air live from the Republican National Convention this afternoon right here in Milwaukee. Day one of the RNC already making headlines. And there is breaking news at this hour from Milwaukee because just moments ago, former President Donald Trump revealing his pick for vice president. Senator J.D. Vance, now his running mate. Trump making his choice from a short list from 4 or 5 finalists in the end. This is the first time in 36 years that a presidential candidate has announced a running mate during the convention. Of course, the convention just getting underway. The last time this happened, 1988, George H.W. Bush introducing Dan Quayle. That was actually during a rally. But while the convention was underway, I think it was day 2 of the convention back then. So many decades later, Donald Trump announcing on day 1 of the convention that his running mate will be J.D. Vance of Ohio. I'm joined here in the broadcast booth by Martha Raddatz, John Carl, our team on the floor, Rachel Scott and Terry Moran. But John Carl, first to you, your reaction on the choice of J.D. Vance.
Well, first of all, I believe this will be the youngest running mate if he becomes vice president, the youngest vice president since Vice President Breckinridge, who served Buchanan back before the Civil War. So he's only 39 years old. He's been in the United States Senate for less than 2 years, elected in 2022. But he is somebody who is extremely popular among what you might call the MAGA wing of the Republican Party, a conservative firebrand, came on the scene with a best-selling book, of course, Hillbilly Elegy, yep. Which was seen as a way of kind of explaining the Trump phenomenon. But back then, this is somebody who was strongly anti-Trump in 2016. He was very critical of Trump, but after Trump won, he came on, as a big Trump supporter, and this will electrify the MAGA wing of this convention, which I think is the convention.
And I'm not even sure people on the floor recognize that the announcement has been made because this is roll call, also another significant moment. We'll talk more about J.D. Vance here in just a moment. Let's take you live down to the floor and let's listen. This is the roll call. We're getting closer to the state of Florida, which I believe, given the math so far, will be the state that puts Donald Trump over the top. We're on Massachusetts right now. Let's listen in and get a sense of the energy on the floor.
Pursuant to the announcement of the delegation and the rules and procedures of this convention, Massachusetts, 40 votes, President Trump.
The roll call, Massachusetts, on to Indiana next, Georgia, Utah, Maryland, Texas, Ohio, J.D. Vance representing that state as the junior senator. So as we stick with these pictures on the floor, Martha Raddatz also here with me. And Martha, the selection of J.D. Vance, Donald Trump has actually said in the past that the selection of a running mate really isn't that important. But he has signaled in recent days that given what the country has witnessed, just Saturday, the attempted assassination of a former president spells out how important all of these choices really are. We've actually seen it for Biden-Harris as well, as people debate whether or not President Biden is up to the job for a second term. A lot of eyes have been focused on the Vice President, Kamala Harris. So in this particular year, perhaps the choice of VP looms even larger than what we've seen in modern politics.
It certainly does. And after this weekend and after what happened, it is a very, very critical choice. You have to wonder whether Donald Trump decided days ago on J.D. Vance or after that assassination attempt. But he's got this young man, as John said, 39 years old. He will be a player in the Republican Party for decades to come. And he not only understands Trump's base, he came from that base. His memoir is about him and his life story. He grew up in poverty. He said, the idea is we have grim statistics. If we are lucky, we will get off welfare. If we're unlucky, we'll die of a heroin overdose. J.D. Vance was raised by his grandparents in part, joined the Marine Corps, fought in Iraq, and then went to Yale Law School. So he is an extraordinary success story. I interviewed him in 2016 about that book, Hillbilly Elegy, and John's exactly right. He wasn't saying nice things about Donald Trump at the time, not at all. But he really has explained himself and his transformation into a Trump supporter quite eloquently.
You're absolutely right on that point, and he'll face that question moving forward now that he is on the national stage beside Donald Trump. But in answering that question to ABC News, in fact, he talked about watching Donald Trump at work as president, speaking to his record and saying the record speaks volumes here that Donald Trump should be given another chance when it comes to the economy, foreign policy, and some of the other key parts of his administration's accomplishments as J.D. Vance sees it. Again, the Ohio senator has been chosen as Donald Trump's running mate. Major breaking headline out of the Republican convention already. What you're watching live right now, roll call on the floor. Terry Moran is down on the floor, I believe, near the state of Texas. Unclear how soon we'll see Senator J.D. Vance, but perhaps it'll be right around the roll call in Texas, Terry.
That's what we're hoping for, no question about it, David. And earlier, this aisle was cleared. It isn't clear now, so we may be wrong about it. But just on J.D. Vance, that flip-flop, as he was accused of performing from being a very fierce Trump critic to being a strong Trump supporter. He explained it once this way. He said that he had to make a choice between the people that had gotten him to Yale Law School, to venture capital and major American law firms, and the people that he came from. And he said that's who he wanted to represent. Now, that may be political opportunism, but anybody who's read Hillbilly Elegy or seen that movie or talked to him about it knows that he didn't want to forget where he came from, no matter what kind of success he had. And here we go. It does look like J.D. Vance is coming down the aisle right now. Oh, no, this is Donald Trump Jr. Sorry about that.
There you see Donald Trump's son, Don Jr., Eric Trump there as well. Do we see J.D. Vance in that scrum of people?
Larry Hogan.
We know that after Maryland, Texas and Ohio comes next, and I would suspect that as you get pretty close to his home state of Ohio, you're going to see J.D. Vance.
Yeah, I would suspect. And by the way, Donald Trump Jr. Was among the most vocal in Trump's inner circle, pushing for J.D. Vance. I mean, really leading an all-out campaign to say J.D. Vance was the person that his father should pick. There were some in Trump's inner circle who, right until I think as early as this morning, were pushing the former president to pick somebody else. But this is Donald Trump Jr.'s candidate, close friend, and somebody he's been pushing for a long time.
J.D. Vance, of course, we have not seen yet here on the convention floor in Milwaukee. We are seeing the children of Donald Trump. Some of them, Don Jr., obviously, Eric Trump. Tiffany Trump, I was told, was in the crowd. There she is. You can see her right there. Here to support their father when the math sets him over the top as the nominee. They're talking about Texas now. Ohio is next, and of course Ohio, the state that J.D. Vance represents. Obviously two senators there, one a Democrat, Sherrod Brown, the other J.D. Vance, the junior senator. It was one of the most highly sought after Senate seats in the country, that seat from Ohio. A lot of attention paid on it, a lot of money spent from both sides, and J.D. Vance obviously winning that seat. I want to go to John Santucci, who reports on Donald Trump for us, has for many years. And John, when did J.D. Vance get this call?
David, it sounds like it's a call that came, believe it or not, with just in the hour. I'm told by my sources that up until just a few hours ago, J.D. Vance had not received any formal call, any formal offer from former President Donald Trump.
Hey, John, let me just interrupt you for 1 second, John. I want to get right down to Rachel Scott, who's with Don Jr. Rachel, can you get a question to the former president's son?
Yeah, Mr. Trump, the reaction just came in. It is going to be Senator J.D. Vance. What is your reaction to this?
I'm incredibly excited. J.D.'s become a really good friend of mine over the last few years. I think he helps us across the board in so many of the swing states that are going to be so critical. His story is just an incredible one. It's the American dream. It's about total success. He's just going to be an incredible pick.
The former president endorsed J.D. Vance in his Senate race. It was really a bright spot for Republicans and what was really a disappointing year. What are you hoping that he brings to this ticket?
The same energy he's brought Republicans in the United States Senate, I want to see on this ticket, and I think he's going to do that for sure.
You're very close to Senator J.D. Vance. You said there's a lot of acquaintances in politics, but you consider him a very close friend. This has been quite a public audition process, vetting process, to be Donald Trump's running mate. What do you make that it's now him?
Well, I'm super excited because I know the man, I know the character, I know his resolve. There's no weaknesses there. I'm just super excited about it.
Thank you so much, sir, for the time. I really appreciate it. Well, there you have it. That is the former president's son. This is a close confidant of his. As you can see, it's really crowded here as the former president's family. I'm going to get back just a little bit to give them a little bit space here, David, as I toss it back to you. But a very, very happy Donald Trump Jr., a very close confidant to Senator J.D. Vance, overjoyed by this choice, saying it's exactly what this ticket needs, David.
Rachel Scott getting the first interview with the Don Jr. there on the floor of the Republican convention here, post the breaking headline that J.D. Vance has officially been selected as Donald Trump's running mate.